Alright, so welcome. Today I'm going to be kind of explaining on how to go about creating imaginative drawing, or how to draw using flow. Really just kind of explain everything that I do in my drawings. And maybe me showing you how I draw can help you in kind of finding your own way of drawing. Alright, so let's begin. Sometimes when I start a drawing, I'll kind of think of a theme or something to base it on, but then later in the drawing it kind of bends and transforms into something else entirely different. So if you ever worry to start a drawing, like literally just place a stroke and then turn that into, like, I see this as sort of like a ribbon, and someone else, or you might think it looks like something else. So I just kind of, this can really spark your imagination, and then from there I think, where does this ribbon connect to? Maybe it's connected to someone's backpack. What's around the backpack that this character is wearing? Maybe a shoulder pad of some sort. And then it's kind of just keeps going from there, and you're like, what's on his shoulder pad? Maybe some bolts, some sort of paint is on the shoulder pad. And really the goal is to try to get in some sort of like zone or flow state where you're not, like, you're thinking, but you're not like straining your mind trying to come up with, like, you're not overthinking. So yeah, usually when I draw traditionally, I work with straight ink. But before that, I started digitally. So I still kind of use the Control-Z button a little too much, just by habit of, I'm not happy with that line, so I quickly hit a button to get rid of it. But after drawing for a while with a brush and straight ink, you really get used to accepting what stroke happens on your paper, and that can be used as like the ribbon or pretty much anything you think of after that stroke. So now I kind of lay down what this character's wearing on his shoulder. So like, this is his shoulder pad. And then now I ask myself, how do I get from this to then his neck, his head, and so on? So you can kind of, I find that placing items on the character can actually be really helpful to figuring out, like, where the placement of his nose, his ear, and so on would be. So that's kind of why equipment can be really guiding. And you might also create a character that you've never drawn before if you leave a lot of areas open. So he's wearing some sort of goggles. And when I'm drawing, I'm always thinking, where do these goggles attach? And it kind of strengthens your believability of that this character can actually exist in some sort of world. I try to add as much variety between materials. So here I added like maybe like a cloth or a leathery fabric coming off of his backpack, or the strap of his backpack. And then this part here would be like metal coming across. And then he's got leather straps. This and the shoulder pad could be some sort of armor, so it's gonna have a reflection coming around. And usually, well, from what I know with reflections is they'll kind of be a blurred silhouette of what's reflected from it. So if there's like a mountain range, then you would see the entirety of the shape. And then with a very shiny reflection, the silhouette, your black, doesn't reach the edge. And then from here down, it would be like a shade. But I'll color this later, so I'll keep that open. Alright, so our character's face is starting. I'm thinking of some sort of mask. I want to make sure his face comes out enough. And when I think of the opposite side, to keep these two, like, it's kind of like ventilation for the mask. When I think of the opposite side, I'm trying to imagine a tube coming from where I drew this first, vents, and then I'm trying to think perspective-wise where the other part of the tube would be. So I'm thinking through and past, at the more like invisible parts of the drawing. Yeah, so once I reach a point where I start to use the same line weight throughout the character, you have to, well, for me, to create contrast, I then will go through and decide what I want to be the darkest, or if the color of his goggles, let's say, are black, then that's when I would go in, and I try to keep an alternating sequence between black and white. So the goggles are black, so I don't want another fabric or something around it that's black touching against it, because I use the black more so as separation, so the viewer can tell the difference between the goggle and like the metal of the goggle and the strap that it's connected to. So since our goggle is black, then we can make this net shape black as well. And it's keeping those straps in between white or a lighter value. And you really want to think about the value with the black and think of it as your darkest tone. So now that we have that, we can do this piece black. And And you can kind of see the pattern that I'm making here. And that's really how it looks from a distance. Because if we zoomed all the way out, now from this distance you can kind of see the separation. And then we can make this last part black. And so I noticed an issue that came up is the strap didn't go all the way around his head, and I kind of mindlessly just put hair around it. So that was more convincing of it actually wrapped around the back of his head. And now I'm thinking of hair for this character, and I wanted to wrap. I'm thinking of it kind of branching out like this from the center line of his head. And you can be as like flowing as you want, or more stiff with the hair. It doesn't really matter. As long as where the hair is flowing from is convincing enough, then that should be good enough. And for this character, I kind of want some sort of headband coming across his head. It kind of just adds another level of kind of like layering different elements on your drawing will make it look more complex, and it gives room for detail. And with the headband pressing down, I'm also thinking of how his hair reacts to that. So since it's kind of a tight headband, some of the hair in the back of his head will kind of stick up. Plus with the colic, also in this direction of his hair, if it was on the side of the character, we also have some strands sticking up. Alright, so so with variety in the hair, I kind of made like this part more shape orientated, this section, and then my next section is a little more flowing and kind of tinier strands, and then my last, this back part, is just kind of like a simplistic shape. And doing that adds a lot of variety in the hair, and I think it looks more appealing, and it's also more interesting to draw, I find. So since this big part of the jacket wraps around the back, I'm going to put a shadow in there. Like that. And then now I kind of have to come up with a way to transition from his head downward through the body, and this is where I would kind of think of proportion of your character. So if this is the head, so we have the head, and I'm going to base the rest of the drawing from the proportion of the head. So I kind of look at So I measure the head going through the mask. So that was his chin. And then his neck would be around half the length of his head. So I'm measuring that, and then I would bring down, so that would be like the length of his neck. And I also take into account that your head, usually in like a more natural pose, sits forward. So I kind of think in this this angle of his head, how much of his neck is actually showing through. Right, so I think about that much of his head would be showing through the bottom area. Skittles is in here. I'm sorry.
Hungry.
You're okay. I am stupid. Alright, cut to this part. Alright, so yeah, so I'm thinking of the angle perspective wise, and the proportion of his head. I think a half of his head for his neck, but then also the angle. So how much would I actually see of his neck from this particular angle? And then, so if this is a head, then I'm thinking a half down from there, and then a head down, so half, and then I immediately think 3 heads, because if I find the lower part of his pelvis, or where the chest ends, to me it's a lot easier to find out where the ending of his chest is. And for me it's a lot of feeling. So I go about 2 heads wide for the chest length on a male, and then the shoulder out from collarbone. And really now I kind of just feel it out, and where I would like what looks right. And you really get the hang of it once you, through repetition and constantly being aware. Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm thinking through drawing the rest of the character. And really, like, with improving drawing, it's just like testing something, playing around with it. Ask yourself, are you happy with how it turned out? And, you know, get feedback from other people. Usually the 2 main things that I've noticed that stand out to most people is really proportion and perspective. And when I started learning in the beginning, I found that the more I learned about perspective, really, it kind of was like the solution to a lot of problems that I would run into of why isn't my drawing turning out. So I would highly recommend learning perspective whenever you can, because it can be boring depending how it's like explained or taught, and depending on how you how much you really want to learn perspective. And I feel if you don't plan on learning it, there's probably gonna come a time where there'll be a spark when you finally, but when you actually feel like learning it. I feel like that's a lot of things with art in general, is once you find a reason to learn it, I think you'll learn whatever subjects like anatomy, shading, light, anything that kind of holds drawing together, or like a basic theory of what creates art. It's really all about your motivation with it. So I was gonna put black on this side area, but I decided not to if I'm gonna color this later. And so, really I'm just going down his body and kind of thinking of whatever shapes seem interesting. And really most of these shapes are kind of, I create them as I go, and going down the other half of his backpack strap, I'm really thinking of, where does this lead to, wrapping around his body. And it's attached to his chest, so it should follow the form of his chest. No, so really everything that is falling onto his chest, I'm thinking about the shape of his chest in perspective, and then whatever falls onto it will all hold the same curve. And really, for the perspective on this drawing, I'm thinking of where any line that describes the length of an object, I'm thinking the lines will converge somewhere in this direction, and then I tried to match all the rest of my lines that lead that way. And the more you keep that consistent, the more your drawing will look like it's in some sort of worlds, whatever you decide on drawing. And personally, if I ever tried like really trying to make my perspective perfect, my characters would end up more stiff than I like. So nowadays I kind of try to be as relaxed as possible when I draw, because if I'm not relaxed, my characters will look very robotic. They'll look like they have no life in them. And just from like me stressing, oh, I need to put everything, perfect grid, and yeah. And you can already see, like, this isn't as symmetrical as this one. If I was to draw a center line, this edge doesn't match up. But really, I like to take it in steps and not like be so hard on myself just with like making one wrong move. So yeah, so that's about the chest. And this piece right here is connected to these straps. So I'm thinking about what is behind the straps and this backpack that he's wearing. So then I'm thinking of some sort of jacket. And really the best way I found to draw clothing is to think about the pinch locations. So where the straps are meeting his claw, or whatever material this jacket's made out of, it's going to pinch in that area, and this part will sink down into it. So yeah, and now when we draw the arm, I'm thinking about really his head size, and I'm going to use that for measuring the rest of his character. But really, I'm thinking about this. As I draw the arm, I think of where the shoulder meets and where it like meets with the chest, the collarbone. Where does the collarbone fall? So I think of his head, and maybe a different color. If I use red, this might be easier. It's plain. So I'll use a different layer too. Let's erase this. Yeah, so I can kind of break down what I'm thinking the best that I can. So, perspective-wise, this is the shape that I was thinking in my head. And to find the center line of any like side of a box, just draw across and X across it, and wherever these meet is your center point. So yeah. And I'm thinking the neck is half, and it also comes at an angle. So that's where his neck would be. Shoulder is about 2 heads in length, like that. So really I'm thinking his shoulder will stick out that side if I don't put a shoulder pad, and then his other shoulder is there, and then his torso is 3. That'd be like stretching across the outer side of the form. But I like to think of the spine and how it comes out for the first head, in, and then starts to go back again. And then from this point, that would be the start of the pelvis. And then as things get smaller, or as things lead down his body, they're going to be smaller because they're further away from our camera or where you're looking in your drawing. So now I would think of the torso, and I'm always thinking of how long is his face, and I really use that measurement throughout the whole character to make sure that the proportions, like that everything is balanced in a way, and that they all hold to this like made up reality that you're drawing on paper or digitally. And so after the head, then I'll think the legs, about 4 from the torso. So 1, 2, and then we reach the knee. And then from the knee, I'm thinking of how this knee sits in space. And then similar to how we thought of the tube in earlier, I'm going to think of that same sort of invisible space coming across from the knee, and you want to think of that same thing to where the other knee is. And if you want the character to be stepping forward, then it's the same thing, except now you're basically taking this measurement that you just made and then pressing it back into perspective. So that's your first point. So if this knee is your first point, and then you measure across to find where the other knee would go, and 2 heads high, then you just press it back into perspective. And now you know where his other leg would be. And then once you get this far down the body, you'll really know how you did, because the feet will have to be placed in, and it's really noticeable if the feet aren't in perspective, because your character will look like one foot is not touching the ground, and they might even look like they're floating. So yeah, that's kind of how I think of the character while I'm like going with the flow of his design as well. That's kind of what I'm thinking in the background. So like the same thing to find the other ends. I'm thinking of the tube. And this part, I'm thinking the head hidden behind the cloth. And to think of the fabric, I'm right here where his shoulder is. That will create a tension point, and that might drag down the fabric or pinch at the top corner. And then, so we'll do the arm. I'm thinking 2 heads down from the shoulder. And then how does this, usually I'll put, if I don't draw the shoulder, like as in the skin and no fabric, like over top of it, then I'll usually put some sort of equipment, and that lets me know kind of what's happening, and it organizes, it keeps things organized for me to kind of understand my own drawing. And now I'm thinking, so like the same thing here, I'll put some sort of equipment as like a guide. So now I know that when I'm placing the cloth, whatever fabric his shirt is made out of, when I'm placing that, I now know where the pinch of it is, because that armor will press down against the shirt there. It will lift there and then come down. And also gravity is really playing a role to what direction your fabric is falling off the character. So if it's really loose, it'll fall downward and off the character's arm. So yeah. I probably went a little too baggy with that part. So yeah. And really I'm using contour lines to show the form of the cloth as well. And I used it on the leather. And it's really depending on the shape. I try to think of perspective when I'm placing the contours as well. So the more lines you can relate to perspective, the more organized I think your thought process will be with it. So the same way that this is my angle of my character, I'm also thinking of that for the contour. So like, it's like hatching, but hatching in perspective. And so like, my contour would go this way on the side if this was the surface, if it was just flat. But if I all of a sudden put something round here, like so, whoops, that's not the right shortcut. Alright, so if something round is on the surface now, Now my contour, I would like come across, but I'm still aiming towards that direction. And then if I was to put contour on this side, I'm almost aiming around and through that form and trying to hit my other vanishing point across. So really, whatever I draw, I'm always thinking of the perspective. So it looks like I made too many undos. So we're gonna have to race through the drawing a bit. Alright. So this is about where the last measurement of his torso would end up. And for the belts, not the belt, but more of like the harness of his backpack, I'm thinking of this has to bend out and reach to the back of his backpack around here. And same with this one. So it's just something I'm thinking about when I'm drawing it. Maybe we want this to connect to his belt. Yeah, so something like that. And then now from here, since this sticks out, I'm thinking the shoulder, unless his arm is like out somewhere. We'll put his arm out. And since we put a reflection on that other shoulder pad, I know that I'm gonna put a reflection on this one as well. So I'm kind of remembering the alternating of our darkest tone, the black. And I have enough I left myself enough room of lighter value there, so the dark here the dark on the reflection of the shoulder pad contrasts with this area. And then I also have a very simplistic shape to kind of contrast with the busyness of the detail in that area. Alright, so shoulder. So since we're seeing the other side, I'm thinking of he's pulling outward. So the claw or the fabric pulled down. It'll be more with his arm on the top half. Now for the hands. For the hands, I really think about how the skin folds and where wrinkles would show up, similar to the folds on the sleeve. And you can really be as like experimental as you want with hands, as you can put gloves on them, you can put rings, like any kind of jewelry. I'd really recommend messing around with as many elements of your character as you can, because whatever you use on one character, you can use for the next character or alter it. Like if I had this shoulder pad for this character, shaped like this, and then I wanted and then I create another character, I could take whatever this character has and make my second character with a similar theme, but then change it up, and maybe I wanted some sort of fur coming around. Maybe the top half here, there's some sort of strap coming across. I could make this bottom part black. Maybe instead of a sort of metal, there's scales. Like, it's literally endless on what you could do with drawings or creations that you've made in the past. Alright, so this other hand should probably not be so zoomed in, but if I'm too zoomed out, no one will see what I'm drawing. It'll be way too small on the recording, so I'll be zoomed out for now. Alright, so with this hand, it's the opposite of the other one, because this one we're on the thumb side. So with the thumb, I'm thinking of the fatty side of the pad of your thumb, and I'm thinking of the stretch from your thumb to your pointer finger, and that's really what gives that lets you go from the thumb side and then stretch across to where you would start the pointer finger. And that's really how I draw, is how does one thing get me to the next, and then you're just constantly so that's how I would think of the thumb side. And then the pinky side, which is and I call it the thumb side because it's the more dominant side of that angle with the hand pose. And then the other side will be the dominant pinky side. And they're very similar. And with most angles, especially if you're drawing like a bigger scene with more characters, and you're not drawing the hand coming at the camera or something like that, then I think most of the time when I draw a hand, they're the more dominant side. So yeah, that's how I draw the other half. And what I was gonna say, oh yeah, the proportions. For the proportion of the hand, I kind of just try to match it up with the palm and the back side of the hand. And really for a lot of the measurements, kind of the same deal with perspective. I really recommend like following it when you can and correcting yourself when you can, but I wouldn't like stress about trying to make it perfect, because from personal experience my drawings would be a lot like lifeless, and sometimes it can be really easy to lose the expression in your drawing. So now I'm kind of thinking of what's on his backpack. And usually when I'm designing a character, I like to mess around with elements or like equipment, especially something that really has no limits on what you could alter to it, but it's still believable. So like, since for this backpack, really the part that makes it a backpack is this top area, and then the straps that connect to it, and that kind of tells that he's wearing a backpack, and our minds will think what is the closest or most relatable thing to what is drawn. And so that after that's like clarifying that with the front stuff, you can do pretty much whatever you want on the back. And like with the it's almost like a jewelry type like freedom, like there's really no limits of what I could do in this section, and it would still be believable enough. And then, so since I put all the almost looks like wiring in this area, it gets very noisy. So then what I would do is break it up with an area of simplicity. So that's why I put this pocket. And then I'm thinking of how to make a variety in materials. So I'm going to add fur because I think fur is fun to draw. And that kind of, it immediately separates the what the viewer is looking at, so it makes it less noisy. And then to go even further by making it easier to read, I can put dark areas in between here. And now it really separates from what's above it, below it, and also it separates it from his arm. Now I have a dark area, a light area, a light area, and a light area. And it's also like a complex design surrounded by less complex shapes. Here we go. So at this point, I don't want to get too carried away with adding, I guess, like accessories to the character's backpack, because sometimes, especially if you're making a character, and I draw in like this sort of way where you just keep adding and adding, you can kind of get a little lost in the perspective, and you might start swaying the backpack out a way that doesn't really follow or is that believable. So I try to think of the whole entirety of the shape. So like this is probably how it'd fall onto his back. And it's quite a large backpack now looking at it. So I try to think how I can bend the drawing back towards like a realistic or believable approach. So yeah, I think that could kind of bend it in the right direction. So yeah, now we can do the legs. And really what I'm drawing, I have to decide, or sometimes not even like really decide, but kind of just let it happen, is like the decision of what to draw in certain locations on the character. I forgot totally what I was gonna say. Okay, cut that part out. Okay, cut back in. And then we're gonna pull cloth down. And then now with how we have the values, I'm definitely going to make his pants darker. Maybe not in like the line art, but definitely when we color this. another way we can add variety and break up these shapes is since the hand, the lines that I drew, if you think of them as contour, are all going down. So next to it, you can place something that's going the opposite direction. So like the straps on his pants work perfect for that. And a lot of times when I'm measuring the proportion, I find it easiest to think of the end point. So like for the leg, I drew the foot, and then everything leading down to the foot, I can have a lot of freedom with what I place, because I know as long as this is like where his foot is placed, then I can do whatever I want and think more of the design than the measurement. So now there's his foot. Especially drawing with like straight ink or straight to line without a sketch, you might end up in situations where the proportion or the perspective is a little weird. So like when I ended with the bottom of the heel, I saw this and it looks like his front of his foot is planted and the back of his heel is lifted. So like design wise, just placing like an extra object can like help bring balance to the character. And sometimes it might create like happy mistakes where you actually end up with a design that you like more than what you had before, just from something like that. So instead of getting like discouraged that you made a mistake, kind of look at it as an opportunity and what you could create from it. So, like we talked about before, with sometimes, like I said, I wasn't going to make the pants darker in this stage, but since I have so much different like straps and different details, it makes it a lot easier to block this out with a dark value and not lose like the detail within there. And you can see already how making that it black within this area now broke up the arm from this, and now from the pants, and now the hand looks like it's actually placed in front of it instead of glued to it. So yeah, and I normally add the dark towards the end of the drawing because that's where I can decide where I want everything placed and not end up in like odd situations along the way from it. And like really we could make this dark as well. Actually, we're not gonna do that. I put dark spaces here, so it will kind of change the shape. And instead of looking in that shape, it will now connect into there. And really what I'm trying to do is make as many separations as I can to add the most variety to the drawing. Alright, so since his foot is out that way, I think I like the idea of doing his other foot back. So first, I measure from the head down. So 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. So the knee would be about there. And I like to use the same design that I did from the first leg. So now I know it'd be about there. And for someone to know that, like with this character design, that this is his other knee, placing the same object, or match an object that's from his other knee, can tell the viewer or whoever you're showing your art to that, hey, this is like the other connecting part. So yeah, and I'm thinking about the cloth and like this invisible line and this with the shape that I'm drawing. And I don't do that right now. Yeah, so I think I placed the legs too close. So since I'm working digitally, we're going to change it a bit. Yeah, so what I was just saying about like seeing or putting the same thing on both legs to make it similar. I chose not to do it because since his knee is already out, it's kind of very easy to tell. So I think this would press up a lot more. Alright, so I think that's good enough. Alright, so once I get to like this stage in the drawing, I have the first character, I kind of start to think like where my second character would be placed. And I see like this opens up to me a lot, and also the hand can also be like a good way to introduce or like flow into the next character. So we'll probably use that later. But for this, I'm going to... We're going to use the elements from this to kind of... I like to add a lot of or like make the characters connected in some way. So yeah, when I'm not recording a video, it's a lot more intuitive, I guess. Like, I really don't pause that much. I kind of just keep going from one element to another, kind of like this, and it's a lot more like free. And since I can't Control Z and make changes whenever I see a mistake, it's almost more freeing in a way because I don't go for perfection, but like just knowing that there's a way that I can undo my mistake, it kind of makes me more like a perfectionist in a way. Say, this is kind of a little more of how I'd normally draw. Yeah, really, once I have the first character down, it's almost like intuitive. From there, I kind of know what the theme is, what I want the flow of the drawing to be. What I want the other characters to look like. And I kind of use like the character before as inspiration for the next character, and then it's like almost like a way of feedback loop that then decides like the next character and after that. Yeah, so here you can kind of tell sort of the materials and the difference in them that I use to separate the different elements of the drawing. So I'll zoom out in a second. So yeah, I have the metal there. So metal, and then we have skin, and I made like this area of his face more simplistic, and then we have detail or like more crowded areas of the hair, and then it goes into more simplistic. I have like a metal ring on his thumb, and then from his hand down it goes from simplistic areas, and that's also where light would be hidden. So I tend to try to not use too many lines where the light's hidden, so that it looks like it's lit just based off of the contour lines. So then this area is more like contour heavy, and I'm trying to express the wrapping or the flow of his hands off to the wrist. And then underneath we have lines that are going crossway because of the form above it going the opposite direction, and that helps break up this part from there. And then also we have simplistic next to busy or complex. And then there's also, since, let me erase this quick. This part looks busy compared to that, but this character as a whole looks more complex and intricate as a whole compared to this like almost like organic cape coming off of this strap. And really, once you have the whole character completed and even your whole drawing, then really like this section becomes its own piece as a whole, and like the puzzle of your drawing. And so when you're designing the second character, it's helpful to think about making characters next to this one if he's more complex, to design the characters around him more simple. And especially once you get into tone and lights and shadows, I use it a lot to place like one character that's has a lot like lighter values on him, or his clothing is a lot lighter than a character standing next to him who's has a lot darker clothing. And it's kind of like the same contrast of placing like an evil villain next to a superhero, and it really stands out and makes whoever's looking at your art, they can immediately tell the difference between your characters, and it won't look so like the same everywhere. Similar to how you would use line weight to distinguish or to separate the elements. So yeah, even here we'll if we make like that nail here longer than this short nail that looks like a lot shorter, that's like another contrast, and your eye will immediately be drawn to all the contrasts. So yeah, we'll keep continuing. So in this spot, I really want like two different forms of hair. So parts is beard, and the other is the fur on his hood. And so I'm making his beard almost darker tone because of how close my lines are together, as well as it's making his beard look a little more intricate or a different texture than the fur around it. So that's kind of another way of adding different elements that are very similar next to each other. And I did the same thing here with the metal together, and now I even go further by making this dark. So yeah, and we'll continue this. So yeah, on this other metal piece, we'll continue, or we'll make them, I have like these like smiley faces on it to break up the material a bit, and it also adds detail that I can keep white and of light value. So then when I make it dark with the black, I can blacken the whole of that metal piece while keeping detail on it, so it doesn't look like just a large shadow that someone can't tell. Right, and we're gonna make his other shoulder pad similar as we can to the other one. I think I'm gonna continue the fur from his hood down lower and maybe onto his other shoulder pad too. So if I, like personally, if I draw something a little bizarre or like out of not realistic or more like a fantasy approach to it, then I'll try to like contrast that idea with something that is more realistic. And you can do that pretty easily by like a human face with nets to something more fantasy-like, because like a human face is really recognizable. We're gonna draw the arm reaching down. So whenever I get to the hand, I try to think of almost like if a ball was connected from the wrist and through the forearm, and you have like this flow coming off the wrist, and it seems to be like one of the more organic like hand gestures that like from life, is because it's a lot more comfortable to have your hand downward than it is up, because it takes a lot more like strain on your hand to actually bend the wrist upward. So yeah, drawing a downward wrist is it's like a comfortable human pose. So whenever you're thinking, how do I draw like the most natural or realistic pose, it's often like what's the most natural or comfortable for the human body to be in is usually the most natural. So we got this character. And then I kind of want to add another character who's also in this like chaos zone almost. So before I started drawing like this mechanical, they're almost like canisters, I thought of kind of the character that's gonna go in it beforehand, and sometimes that happens that way, but other times, you know, I might just like start drawing some like mechanical thing, and then the character will come like from it or afterwards. Alright, so yeah, I think of sometimes I think of the character before what I'm putting around it, and then you can kind of base whatever you're drawing around the character and its like space that it takes up. So for this character, I thought of the pose a little beforehand. And I really don't know which way is better because I feel like they both work. Kind of just depending on whichever one happens. So yeah, this is going to be sort of like kind of like a bear is what I was planning on. A lot of times when I'm drawing, I like to not decide on like a guaranteed outcome, because sometimes you might think of a better idea that comes along. So like, I planned on a bear with this one, but I'm thinking he looks more like some sort of lion creature instead. So. And then to make his fur on his clothing a little bit different than the fur on his head, we can make more almost flowing strands. And they're closer together. And if we wanted to, we could even darken to show the shadow, the cast shadow that the hair is making below it. So yeah, here's part one of sharing pretty much all that I know about drawing and sort of how you can use creativity. You can create your own drawings. I don't really use reference anymore. I enjoy creating my own elements a lot more and looking at more of life and gathering whatever I can along the way and using that in my drawings. So yeah, if the second part will probably be a mixture of drawing, continuing this drawing, or I'm going to continue and jump into coloring before we get any farther on it. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching, and there's more to come very soon.